Welcome back to part 2 of the first round of the Marvel March Madness tournament bracket. We have 5 more matches for you today, and hopefully next time we'll just do 2 matches and just continue from there until the end of the month. So, let's get right into the first round of matches. Both of these films have very similar behind-the-scenes backgrounds. Both were victims to the producer's boot, where the films needed to shove in references or plot points for future films. On the whole, both face a lot of story problems and pacing issues. Age of Ultron aimed to establish a lot of what we are currently seeing in the third phase of the MCU, whereas Iron Man 2 set up or pretty much confirmed the idea of characters crossing over, further laying down the foundation for future crossover films in general. And while both stories are convoluted and follow a very similar pattern to their predecessors, I would have to say that Iron Man 2 was the better story. This is mostly due to the lack of multiple storylines that go nowhere. Age of Ultron had Thor going to a well for no particular reason other than to further set up more films. Iron Man 2, while being a setup film, is rather straightforward. Iron Man 2 gets the point. Iron Man 2 gets the point. Both of these films have rather lackluster fight sequences. Age of Ultron had a pretty fun intro fight scene, though, and the Battle of Sokovia was interesting. There just isn't anything here to make it too breathtaking. Iron Man 2 had Whiplash show up at a race, and the action, for the most part, was fun. Yet again, Iron Man gets another point. Age of Ultron's leads get some development. We do see the beginning divide between Tony and Steve that we would eventually see play out in Civil War. Hell, we even get to know the family's life of Hawkeye. It is a weird cutaway, I have to admit, but I honestly enjoyed it. Iron Man 2 doesn't have too much development for Iron Man, though, other than to see himself go through a midlife crisis before he finds a cure for his metallic poisoning. There is some closure for his character when it comes to his relationship with his father. Age of Ultron had the better character development, and thusly gets a point. In terms of comedy, both of these films have very standard bits of comedy. It was kind of funny to have Ultron sing that one Pinocchio song, and that classic meme of language is a classic, but the jokes don't quite hold up. The same could be said for Iron Man 2, but the quality of the writing holds up very well as opposed to Age of Ultron. I honestly still can't get over Tony being put inside of a donut. It was hilarious. Moving on to fight Captain America the First Avenger for a spot at the Final 8 is Iron Man 2. The story of the first Captain America is very simple. A mild-mannered man with a golden heart and a dedication for his country is constantly underrated due to his physical appearance and performances. But when former Hydra scientists choose him for a secret soldier program, Steve Rogers becomes Captain America. The main problem, though, that arises with this film is that most of the interesting character bits are in the first half of the film. Once Rogers becomes Captain America, his character becomes less interesting. But the first half is so good, I kind of find myself watching his story more so than Iron Man 2.
Point goes to Captain America.
When it comes to the action, Iron Man 2 seems very weak against Captain America. Each of the action sequences feel like set pieces, especially during the montage sequence in Captain America. The action sequences serve to advance the story as well, unlike Iron Man 2.
Captain America snags another point.
As mentioned before in the story section, Steve Rogers is a compelling character in the first half of the film. Afterwards, not so much. But the way that the character comes off in the beginning is the most earnest character I've ever seen in the MCU. However, Iron Man 2 has the upper hand as the lead character is consistent all throughout the film.
Iron Man 2 steals the point.
The comedy in both films are on the same level in my opinion, but the film that has the most memorable of comedic sequences has to go to Captain America. Between Rogers being shot at to prove that his shield is bulletproof, going on tour as a poster boy, and saying that he couldn't really get drunk anymore, I think the Captain has the upper hand.
And moving on to the final 8 is Captain America, the First Avenger.
The Winter Soldier is a special kind of film. The story feels like it's a totally different film than a superhero film. It plays more like a spy, action, thriller kind of film. The Winter Soldier also tests Rogers' commitment to S.H.I.E.L.D., his country, and more importantly, his friendship with Bucky Barnes. This is definitely a great story to tell, and was a natural step up from the first. Guardians of the Galaxy is very similar to the first Guardians of the Galaxy is very similar to the Winter Soldier in terms of challenging genre. The first Guardians film is kind of like a space opera as well as a comedy. But the difference here is that Guardians, for as much as it tries to run from the typical Marvel movie syndrome, it falls into be another Marvel film. The Winter Soldier, if you take the brand name off of it, the film is just a good spy film.
The point goes to the Winter Soldier.
The Winter Soldier's action is peak perfection. The common thing I see nowadays with action films is the dreaded shaky cam. The Winter Soldier, while it has one sequence where it does this, the action is shot well and is choreographed to perfection. The sequence at the bridge between the Winter Soldier and Cap is a great knife fight sequence. Suffice to say, the Winter Soldier has a leg up on the competition. Guardians' action is the typical action with blasters, blades, and fists. There isn't a lot of memorable action sequences aside from the prison breakout sequence.
The Winter Soldier snags a point.
Guardians of the Galaxy has some pretty memorable characters. Rocket, Groot, Gamora, the whole team is recognizable and clearly defined from their own conflicts. But where it falls short to the Winter Soldier is in its villain. Ronan the Accuser is just another power-hungry tyrant in the Marvel Universe. However, the Winter Soldier has the advantage of having their major connections to the hero. Having the villain be both S.H.I.E.L.D. and his old forgotten friend is how you kind of make a really good conflict between a hero and a villain.
The Winter Soldier snaps a point.
The Winter Soldier, despite being a really good film, it doesn't really have a lot of comedy. This is where Guardians has the advantage. Guardians has both the trademark Marvel humor as well as James Gunn's own humor.
Even though the Guardians won this round, it still isn't enough to compare against the Winter Soldier, and thusly he moves on to the final 8.
Ant-Man's story is kind of special, but with some flaws. It is common knowledge now that Edgar Wright was up to write and direct this film. But due to behind-the-scenes drama, he was moved to a producer's credit, and the script was reworked and was directed by Peyton Reed. This had led Ant-Man to have a kind of a tonal confusion, where at points the story has hints of Edgar's writing, but at other points it feels like a Lifetime original film. Black Panther, on the other hand, doesn't have this problem. Ryan Coogler has a clear vision for his film, and the story, though at times can seem contrived or even boring, that isn't enough to stop the enjoyment of Black Panther. And aside from that, it was written by two people who worked together, who didn't have to have someone else rewrite it.
Black Panther wins the round.
The action in both is hard to judge. Both have creative ways of expressing the action of the film. Ant-Man utilizes microphotography as well as the hero's gimmick to make the action cool and often hilarious. Black Panther, meanwhile, isn't very gimmicky, but the action in the trial sequences are influenced by African fighting stances and movements like the Zulu culture.
Ant-Man steals the round.
Ant-Man's characters are easy to understand. Scott Lang is an ex-con who must go back to crime to get money. However, it does just seem very bland, as he is also a divorced father with a daughter who loves him, but not the stepdad. Not the most interesting character, but it works for the film. Black Panther, on the other hand, not only has a more compelling lead, but also has a more memorable villain than compared to Yellow Jacket.
Black Panther takes the point.
The strongest aspect about Ant-Man is that the comedy is pretty strong. It is a very funny film I would expect from a prospective Edgar Wright film. The comedy in Black Panther, however, is very minimal, and when there is comedy, half of the time they all fall flat, which is frustrating because I expected a little more effort in that department.
Ant-Man takes the point, and as you can clearly see, the points are tied 2-2. So let's go for a tiebreaker. Best music.
The music in Ant-Man is decently handled, with little strums of the guitar giving it a distinct heist film feel. However, Black Panther's music has much more going on into it. Some of the score used authentic African instruments and choir work to bring more of an authentic feel to the world of Wakanda.
Black Panther takes the point and moves on to the final 8.
Captain America Civil War feels like a film that has some payoff to previous films. The story is loosely based off of the Mark Millar story of the same name. The film felt like it was dealing with the consequences of past events, as if the franchise needed to be kept in check. The Registration Act certainly added some conflict between each of the characters. Thor Ragnarok's story is completely different. This film felt like a fun road trip film mixed with elements of gladiatorial fight sequences and Van Halen callbacks. But while Thor 3 is fun, it has the problem of feeling like two films being combined into one. Civil War has a more contained story with a great central conflict between Tony, Bucky, and Steve.
Captain America Civil War had the better story and thusly gets the point.
The action in both films are really well handled. Civil War had one of the best sequences at an airport, for crying out loud, and Thor Ragnarok has probably more memorable sequences. Hulk vs. Thor was fun, as well as the final fight between Hela and Team Thor. As much as I love the airport sequence, Thor does have the better fights.
Action goes to Thor Ragnarok.
Civil War's characters is forced to take sides, and a lot of the development for the characters are tested here, especially the relationship between Steve and Tony. becomes the crux of the conflict between the characters. Suffice to say, the characters here are done well for the most part. The villain is also done efficiently. His plan actually fully works for once, even if he isn't that memorable. Thor in Ragnarok feels like a completely different character. This is both a good and a bad thing in my opinion. It is good because we finally have an enjoyable Thor that isn't boring, but this does cause a digression between the different incarnations.
Civil War gets the point due to consistent characterizations.
Civil War has some fun comedy in the airport sequence, but it is only a tiny bit in the 2-hour film. Thor Ragnarok, on the other hand, is a mile-a-minute force of comedy. This is probably the most comedic a Marvel film has become.
Point goes to Thor Ragnarok. And, once again, we have to have the musical tiebreaker. So, which one had the best music?
The music in Civil War is kind of more of the same when it comes to standard Marvel films. Thor Ragnarok, however, is extremely stylized with classic 80s synth soundtracks. Honestly, Thor's music is much more memorable than the music of Civil War.
Thor Ragnarok moves on to the final 8 and is our last spot for the final 8 films that are in this bracket. Thank you so much for watching the second round of this whole bracket. I wanted to do something fun, so this is just my way of doing this in celebration of Marvel's 10th anniversary. So next week, we'll be taking a look at the fight between Iron Man and Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 and Iron Man 3 versus Spider-Man Homecoming. So, I hope you guys tune in, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace. Oh, and by the way, there is still going to be reviews this month. It's just I've been preoccupied with this for so long. So, this week, I will be reviewing A Wrinkle in Time. So, no need to worry. There will be more reviews coming out. Just be patient. And peace.